Well, do you think there is a good argument, and by good I mean compelling, not just emotionally, but logically, argument for atheism?
No.
I don't think so either.
No. I mean, I used to be an atheist.
Okay.
So you might say, well, then why were you ever an atheist? Well, I mean, here's the thing. What I would say is the only way you're going to make sense of atheism is to stop making sense about the world, really. So in other words, you have to push a very highly skeptical line about the scope of human knowledge, and you're going to have to push a line metaphysically that makes the world ultimately unintelligible. And one problem with that is I don't think it's because, and the reason I say this is because I would say that if you allow that the world is intelligible, if you acknowledge some version of what's traditionally called the principle of sufficient reason, which says that for whatever exists and whatever occurs, there's some intelligibility to it. There's some way to make sense of it, some way to explain it. We may not always know what it is, but objectively, there is some reason why things are the way they are, not some other way. The minute you buy that basic premise, I would say you're ineluctably led to some kind of theism. And the only remaining question is the details. Mm-hmm. Exactly what kind of philosophical theism are you committing yourself to? And is there any world religion that actually can be grounded in that philosophical theism? But you're embracing some kind of philosophical theism, which is why I think that the deepest atheists always end up pushing some kind of unintelligibility in the world, whether it's a Hume or a Nietzsche or someone like that. You can't really, in other words, be a rationalist, I would say, in the broad sense that means someone who takes the world ultimately to be rational through and through, to be an intelligible order, and maintain any kind of atheism. Okay, so that means that if you're going to hold on to atheism, you're going to have to make the world ultimately unintelligible, and thus the mind something that's not capable of finding intelligibility in it or making sense of it. One problem with that, though, is I would say you can't ultimately make coherence of sense of that view. Another problem with that, is that modern atheists tend to have a very highly confident view about human knowledge in other areas, particularly in science, and natural science especially. So they often pit science against theism as the way that knowledge should be arrived at. This is the real McCoy. This is the real stuff. Modern science and traditional theism and traditional philosophy don't measure up to it, so we need to reject those and so on. Okay. So they're committed to a kind of intelligibility of the world in a way that a David Hume or a Friedrich Nietzsche were not. You know, Hume or Nietzsche, I mean, this is ironic that new atheists often look to them, I think especially Hume more than Nietzsche, but look to them as kind of forebears in the lack of faith, not in the faith, but forebears in atheism. But I think they would have looked at modern new atheist style scientism as charmingly naive, as silly and naive about human knowledge, that they would say that the human mind is simply not capable of penetrating reality in the way even the new atheists suppose, let alone theists. So anyway, at one point in my life, I was willing to kind of go there and entertain that idea. And at some point I realized it's unintelligible. You can't ultimately make sense of the view that the world is unintelligible. And
what about the atheist who says, I'm not claiming it's intelligible, I'm claiming there are certain things that when we believe them, certain actions that when we act in that way, things work out better for us. And so it's more of a pragmatic approach I have to reality. It's not to do with can I know it, but when I use it in this way, I flourish, people around me flourish.
Yeah, but of course you're claiming to know that, right? So even to make claims about utility or pragmatic value presupposes a kind of epistemology and metaphysics, or to use the, not to use the fancy jargon, it presupposes that there is some fact of the matter about how the world is, and that we can know that it's that way. And the question is, can you maintain even that thin sort of view about reality and our knowledge of it, consistent with a thoroughgoing atheism, with a thoroughgoing naturalist view of the world? And I would argue you can't. And now, obviously, there are details that the interested viewer or reader would want to know about. And I've spelled all that out in detail in several places. But I would say that at the end of the day, you're going to have to, if you're going to make atheism work, you're going to end up with a very deflationary account of reality and of our knowledge of it. And it's going to be so deflationary that, first of all, it's not going to be compatible with the confident claims that someone wants to make about science, or even about the pragmatic value of science, the pragmatic value of whatever moral view they're committed to. But I would say beyond that, you really can't ultimately make this radical, deflationary, and skeptical view of reality and knowledge consistent, even with the most minimal sort of human thought. So for example, I would say that if you deny that reality is ultimately intelligible, that things exist and occur for reasons, there are things that cause them to be that way and rather than some other way, say, then to be consistent, you're ultimately going to have to say that that's true of your own thought processes. And so we ordinarily think that the reasons that the things we believe on the basis of rational grounds, even if it's just minimal stuff like I'm sitting in a studio here at a table having a conversation with someone, something trivial like that. If someone says, if I just forget about someone else, if I say, why do I believe that? If I'm just talking to myself, as it were. Well, I believe that because of the sensory experiences I'm having, and I believe that I can draw rational inferences based on the kind of sensory experiences I've had in the past, and how it's likely, given those, that I'm actually having this conversation now, and so on. Or even if I, entertain some crazy scenario, like maybe I'm in the Matrix, having the experience of being on Pints With Aquinas generated by the Matrix. Okay, well, even to entertain that hypothesis, I have to be able to see the connection between different ideas, between a premise and a conclusion, and so on, and draw the inference that, well, it might be at least possible that that's what's going on. So I'm presupposing that I have a functioning intellect, and that intellect can see the relations of ideas and draw inferences and so on. Okay. Now, if you deny the principle of sufficient reason, you deny that things are ultimately intelligible, then you also have to deny that you can know even that much. It would follow that it might be that what you're having right now are actually just a stream of incoherent thoughts that have no logical connection to one another. And they only seem to have a logical connection to one another for no reason whatsoever, no rhyme or reason whatsoever. And if you say, yeah, but it sure doesn't seem that way, why would it not seem that way if it were the case? For no rhyme or reason whatsoever. After all, things can happen with no rhyme or reason whatsoever if you deny the principle of sufficient reason. Which means that the skepticism you have to commit yourself to is so radical, it undermines skepticism itself. It undermines the possibility of a functioning intellect, even of the skeptic himself. And even if he starts freaking out about that, right? Maybe that's true, right? Maybe I can't try. Well, he's drawing an inference when he does that. He's relying on his intellect. So you can't really coherently commit yourself to this radically deflationary view of the nature of reality and our knowledge of it. You end up really undermining everything. You burn down the village in order to save it, the old Vietnam era analogy. So and notice what I've been describing here. It has nothing to do with accepting relativity theory or evolution by natural selection. Forget about those highfalutin ideas. Even something as basic as I'm thinking through whether this argument I read in this book is correct or not. You can't even do that much if you're committed to this, the thoroughgoing skepticism you need to commit yourself to in order to support an overall atheist worldview.
My gosh, I want you to just keep talking, because I'm at the point where I'm well over my head here. And this is the kind of podcast I can't wait to go and listen to so I can follow it more closely without feeling like crap when I have to ask him next. It was great. Thank you.